All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is lesson three of Zero to Hero Dataverse Quest session. Today, it is my delight to have one of the greatest in this community, in this platform, Rebekka Aalbers. Um, I've been a fan, and you hear this from me to specific people in the industry that I observe from the background, but I've referenced to Rebekka's training before when it comes to Dataverse within teams. I think Rebekka, you were the first one to kind of tackle some of the questions I started to have. So for in this side of the globe, you became the superhero Dataverse data teams for me. So
Really?
appreciate yeah appreciate all the material you put out there, the willingness to share knowledge online and to devote a couple of hours of presentation, and I know an immense number of minutes just getting ready to share with us. So thank you so much for being here today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let me share my screen. So, welcome to the third session, I think it is, of Zero to Hero, the Dataverse Quest. Uh, Today, my session will be about administration for citizen developers. I think there was a little hiccup along the way where my session was put down as only about application lifecycle management. There will be some part of application lifecycle management in it, but I will talk about a lot more topics than just that. So it's all part of the Power Community mentorship sessions. You probably know all this, so I won't uh, um, read the whole slide for you. Let's give a short introduction about me. Rebekka Aalbers, I'm from the Netherlands, so basically the other side of the globe from a number of you guys. I work as a technology consultant at McCaw, a Microsoft partner in the Netherlands. I'm a co-organizer of one of the Power Platform user groups, Power Addicts NL. We focus on both the Power Platform and Dynamics 365. And I have been a Microsoft Business Apps MVP since December 2019. So I was just about a couple of months MVP when Corona hit the fan. Well, I already mentioned I'm a Dutchie, and some fun facts about me. I'm a book nerd. I love reading ever since I learned how to. I'm a lover of all things unicorn. There is no reasoning behind it. I just like unicorns, and my nieces of 4 and 8 like the fact that I like unicorns. So we'll just keep on doing liking unicorns. I have 3 kids and 1 husband. We don't have any kids, so our cats are kind of our children. That's why they come first. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. There are 4 topics that I want to discuss: security, the what and how on security concepts in Dataverse; solutions, what are they and why and how to use them; ALM basics, so how to do Dataverse application lifecycle management, a couple of basic principles. There will be a session on more in-depth pro code developer kind of focused ALM session. So if you want to dive deeper, then there is for sure a session going into that later on. And say COE kit basics. What is the Center of Excellence kit and what can you do with it? But first things first, security. So how do you secure your data in Dataverse? And there are a couple of concepts that come into play: environment access, security roles, data ownership, business unit teams and users, and then 2 oddballs, field security and sharing. But the first thing is actually, if you want to secure your data in Dataverse, is to think about environment access. Because, and I'm not talking about Power Portals, because I was thinking, do I want to really put that as part of this? And I was like, no, let's keep things a little bit simpler. Let's focus on regular Dataverse access. And that means that a user can only have access to Dataverse data if the user is synchronized to the Dataverse user table. The users come from Azure Active Directory, and there is this one-way synchronization. It's not perfect, so it's not like every user all the time is represented in the user table, but it's done regularly, and you can push synchronization if need be. But sometimes you want to restrict that. Sometimes you have environments, Dataverse environments, where you want to restrict who can use data in the first place, who can be a user in the environment and do something with the data. That's one of the first times to restrict, and that's by assigning an AD group to a certain environment. So that means that only the members of that Azure Active Directory group will actually be synchronized to the Dataverse user table. So where do you do that? You go to the Power Platform Admin Center, and if you don't know, there's a nice short URL, aka.ms/ppack. And there you can you select the environment where you want to restrict the users through a certain AD group. Then here in the details, there's an edit link, and then there's the option to add an AD group. And when you save it, that means that only users in that group can do something with stuff in your environment. And that means literally everything. Because if you, for example, want to make use of approvals, all the approvers need to be in the group that is synced to the user table. So that's something to take into consideration when you want to try something like this. The next thing is security roles. And security roles is the way to provide role level and role-based permissions on Dataverse data. So what do they determine? So they determine what a user can see. So what tables, what owners, to what data owned by who, what model drifts and apps the user can use, if they are able to use a Canvas app or use approvals for that matter. It's just in that case, it's automated. But also what a user can do with the data that they have access to. Can they create, update, delete, those kind of things? So let's have a quick look at setting up security role. This is, I have to be honest, this is the worst piece of UI still available somewhere in Dataverse or in the configuration of Dataverse. It's one of the pieces that is yeah, it has been there for quite some time, and I hope that they will update the user interface because it's not very user friendly. You have when you create a security role or update one of the existing security roles, you get this screen where you have all these tabs that are basically kind of a groups of tables or features where you can add permissions to. So in this screenshot, I actually focused on the core records. If you create your own tables, like I know that Victor did a session on data modeling. So how do you set up your data structure? Your tables will be you can find under custom entities, but also there will be a long list of other tables as well. And you also see here that the new naming conventions, like there's no mentioning of tables, it's custom entities because that was how they used to be called. So here you see a list of the core records tables, and then to the right, you see the different types of permissions that you can grant: create, read, write, delete, depend to, assign, share. So the first one kind of make sense, right? You create, read, write, and delete. Write, update, edit, whatever you want to call it. Then append and append to has all to do with making relationships between different tables. I always forget which one is which way. So if you have issues with setting a lookup to another table or relate two tables to each other in any way, have a look at what is set to the append and append to. Then the last two is assign and share. They are not available for all the tables. So you see a couple of oddballs as well, but some tables only have the first 6 types. Then you can set for each circle, you can set, when you click on it, you can actually navigate through the different levels of permissions that you give for that specific table, for that specific role. It goes from none, when it's only a red outline, to user, just a little bit of yellow. Half yellow means someone has access on a business unit level. And then 3/4 green is someone has access to parents and child business units. And then someone has permissions on an organizational level. So what this means, I will dive into a little bit deeper. But basically, this will give you a lot of ways to do a very granular and a specific set of security per table. Just an FYI, if you click on the name of the table, you will actually set all types for that table at the same time. So if you would want to restrict to none, it's easier to click on the name. If you want to do just the create, you click on the circle that is below create. One of the nasty things about this screen is that it's not a fixed header. So if you scroll down, you actually miss out on which column am I at. But if you hover over one of the circles, you actually see if it's create, read, write, delete, whatever is here. So you have the security role, but then a user has to have that security role, right? So I have a user in the user table. I have created a security role, and the next thing is actually making sure that the user can make use of the security role. And there's basically two ways of making sure that the user gets the security role. That's either by assigning it to the user directly, or assigning it to a team that the user is a member of. And teams we're talking about, because teams, there's, well, Microsoft Teams and whatnot. In this case, it's Dataverse team. So it's a specific concept that has been around for a while in Dataverse. And it's basically a group of users. We'll dive into a little bit more detail on teams later. But so both of these assignments you can actually set up in the Power Platform Admin Center by going to the environments, and then there are a couple of short links if you open up an environment or go through the settings page. You select your user that you want to assign the security role to. Look up the security role, select it, click on save. Basically very similar how you would do it with Teams. You would go to the settings and then look to Teams and then find your security role and apply it. So having it on the Teams level is the preferred way, because it would allow you, the only thing you then have to do is actually make sure that the membership of the team is happening. Mala, I'm going to mute you, sorry. So it could mean, so you can actually apply multitude of security roles to a user, or a user can actually be member of multitude of teams. And what is actually applied when a user will interact with Dataverse is the sum of all the permissions assigned to either directly or from the teams. So meaning you have like a user that has a security role 1 applied directly, and then 2 roles from inherited from a teams that the user is a member of. That equals a lot of permissions in a nutshell. So I referred to data ownership a little bit back in my presentation, and there is actually, it's related to the type of table created. So when you create a table, there are 2 options that you can choose from: user or team owned and organizational owned. And user or team owned means that the data inside of that table can be owned by either a user or a team. But organizational owned doesn't have that feature. It's the organization owns the data. You can still restrict access to the data, but the difference is that there's less granularity for organizational owned data and user or team owned data. So how does it look like when you create your table and decide on what type of record ownership you want to use? And here it's a record ownership, not row ownership. You create your table, and then on the form there is this option, record ownership, and it's set by default to user or team, but you can select organization. And this is the one time off, so it's you set it right at creation. This is not something that you can update afterwards. And what happens is that there's a difference in the default columns that are created. For a user or team owned table, there are columns created where you register the ownership of the record. So you see an owner record, there are a bunch of other records in there as well. And then there's the owning business units. I'll get back to a little bit more detail on business units, but it does play a role in deciding on if a user has access or not. If I would look at this in a model-driven app form, I could add that to the screen. Most of the out-of-the-box forms like this, the account form, do have that in the upper right corner, and you can change that. So this is where it's different from, for example, the created by or modified by fields. Those are automatically filled, and you cannot change it afterwards. But the ownership of data can actually be transferred to someone else as long as the table's team or user owned. When I create an organizational owned table, this is, so I just created a table called org owned item. All the owner columns are missing. There's an organization ID, and that's about it. But there is no concept of ownership for users or teams in these kinds of tables. So there are less out-of-the-box columns as well. So if we go back to here, you see that this is then the different, for example, data performance dashboard. It's an out-of-the-box table that does some stuff, but it's an organizational owned table. And the other ones do have the additional options. One other difference that you have between organizational owned and user and team owned is that in an organizational owned table, you only have the permissions between none and organization. The user, business unit, and parent-child business units options are not available. So where you use the organizational owned is mainly if it's like often if you know that there is no such thing as a row level or role-based security that needs to be applied to a table. Either someone has access or someone don't. And if the person has access, the person needs to have access to all the rows in the table. That's where you go for an organizational owned table. Lots of times more kind of configuration types of data. And when you want to be able to grant the permissions to subsets of the data based on where someone is in the organization or who owns the data, that's when you use a user or team owned. So let's dive a little bit deeper in some of the other concepts that I mentioned. Business units, teams, and users. Business units are containers of users and teams, and they're hierarchical in nature. So there's always a root business unit when you create a Dataverse environment or a Dataverse database. And then optionally, you can add additional business unit, children's, grandchildren's, a whole structure of them. And they can be used as a security boundary for accessing Dataverse data. So what we saw in the security role screens is that you can set permissions to a level where someone only has access to data owned by the business unit. That would mean that a user can see or interact with data owned by other users in the same business unit or owned by other teams in the same business unit. So a user and a team is always assigned to a business unit when you create. By default, it's to the root business unit, but you can modify that to move a user from one business unit to another. And that would have an effect on what is the data that the user would see if you would use this kind of security concept. And then Dataverse teams. So the teams as a group of users. There is a bunch of types here as well, but the first one is the default team. So whenever you create a business unit and you do that in the admin center, there is always a team linked to that business unit created as well. Every user that is of that business unit is a team member of this team. This team can have a security role assigned to it, and it's an easy way if there is something, some kind of data access that you want to provide to all users in a certain business unit to just assign this role to the default team. So there is no other, because it's automatically maintained. As long as you organize your users in certain business units, you don't have to worry about this basic access that these users need. The next thing is an owner team, and this is a team that you can create yourself, and it can own data. The default team can also own data, by the way. It's maintained in Dataverse. So you create it in Dataverse or in the admin center, but it's stored in Dataverse. And then in the Power Platform, you maintain who is a member of this group or this team. So you can also assign security roles to it. I referred to that before. But then a nice thing is it can actually have members from this different business units. So this allows for this is a way for allowing people to get access to data outside of their business unit without having the permissions on an organizational level. There's other things, there's new things coming on the around this topic, and I will talk about that a little bit later. And then there's the third type of team, and actually it's two types, but I just put them in one because they're very similar, and that's the AAD security group and AAD office group. AAD in this case is Azure Active Directory, and this allows you to create teams connected to groups in your Azure Active Directory that can own data, but are not maintained in Dataverse. They're maintained in the Active Directory. So that would allow you to have this centralized kind of security concept, security boundary, let's call it security boundary, that can give access both to resources in Dataverse, but also to other applications. I try to use this as my main source of security concepts because of the fact that we can reuse it. And often what you see if you talk to people within an organization and they talk to, we need this group that has access to this and this and this, that there is already a security group available for that specific group, because there's another process that is meant for another application, or they have a Microsoft Teams for that matter, because that's an Office 365 group in the background that they maintain themselves. So it's a very good way to reuse these things that often are already there. And as with owner teams, they can have security roles assigned to them. And the last one is a bit of an oddball. It's access teams. I won't dive too deep into access teams, but I wanted to mention it here, that when you're creating your Dataverse application, model-driven app or something else, and you're thinking about, yeah, I have this table, but who needs access to what? That's very flexible, and I can't really connect it to an organizational structure or a business unit. It's really on a row-to-row basis. That's where access teams plays a role, because that basically allows you to create a specific group for a specific piece of data, record in this case, and they only have access to that record because they are part of that group or that team connected to that one record. These teams are maintained in Dataverse as well, and they don't have security roles because the access team gives the right permissions to the people that are a member of it. So let's have a look at an example hierarchy. So this is a Dataverse environment where we do have the root business unit. Let's put on a laser pointer. So we have here the root business unit, and then there's the default team of this root business unit. And there are 2 users. They are of the root business unit. That's why they're part of the default team. Then there is one additional custom team created, and user 2 is also part of this team. There are 2 child teams that both also have their default team and an additional team. The default team of the first child business unit has user 3, and the default team of the second has user 4 and 5. But actually, quite a number of the members of that, the users belonging to certain business units, are members of teams in other business units as well. So let's have a look at user 1. User 1 has a role assigned that gives permissions on its own business unit, and then that would allow the user to see data or interact with the data for the business unit when the user owns the data itself, when it's owned by user 2, or when it's owned by either of these 2 teams, but not outside of that. But then the user is also part of this team in a child business unit, and this team has a security role granting organizational level access to the same data that the user in this team only has directly only has business unit level. So I mentioned before, security roles combined, that's the permissions that you have, meaning that because the user is part of this team, it actually has access to all the data for this table owned by everyone in the organization. So hierarchical data access implementation, that was actually the way of implementation, that how business units and teams and users were structured. So you have another example here. There's Woodgrove as the root business unit. There are 2 divisions. There are 2 users, user A and user B. The user A is of division A. The user has role Y assigned to it and sees, based on that, the contacts owned by division A. User B has role Y, but then applied indirectly, and because it's in division B, it only sees stuff that's owned by division B. What's currently in preview is that you can actually, without having the need of these cross business unit teams, you can assign security roles for another business unit than your default business unit connected to the same business unit. So in this case, you have user Y that has both role Y assigned for division A and division B, meaning it has access to all the contacts. So it looks very similar, but the outcome is pretty different. And this is where a structure where you have people that, for example, I don't know, there is this chain of supermarkets, and there are users that work at different locations of that supermarket. Not all of them, but specific ones. The second structure actually would allow you to grant the right permissions directly to the user, where that would not be the case in the first one. So with this new feature, you will also be able to set the business unit field directly. That was until now we could not update the business unit. That was something that was derived from either the owning user or the owning team. And now we can actually update that. And it can make life easier, because it will allow you to own data personally, connected to different business units without having to have permissions for the whole organization. There are a couple of other concepts as well that are less used, sometimes very useful, but used with care. You can, so security roles will allow you to do role level security, but it's still, if someone has access to the record or row of data, they have access to everything. And of course, you can restrict access to it by not showing data in a form or something like that, or working with just not showing it. But in the end, if a user would go through the API, if they would know how to, they would be able to access that data. Field level security actually allows you to restrict data in certain fields. But it's a separate concept and not set up with its own structure, and it uses field security profiles. And you will need to enable it on a field by field basis. And this is mainly meant for use for securing sensitive data, like, let's say, bank account numbers or social security numbers, or these kinds of specific data that could be part of a table, but that you want to make sure that only a very specific group of people has access to. Record sharing is actually when one user with access shares his or her permissions with another user that actually doesn't have access based on security roles. I tend to turn this off as much as possible. It is useful if you want to do in a handover scenario where some configuration is not done yet. I prefer to just use security roles on Azure AD groups and update Azure AD group or something like that, because it's very hard to get rid of these shared records. Access Team actually kind of is making use of this concept, but with Access Team, at least I see who has access to that by showing who is part of the Access Team. So this is basically what I wanted to say about these two topics. If you're interested, please have a look at the documentation to dive deeper in these two. The next topic I want to discuss is solutions. Solutions are the functional component packages meant for putting together all the resources to be transported to other solutions. So solutions are containers of Power Platform components They're used to package all the different components of an application to transport them from one environment to another. So this is kind of this early stages of application lifecycle management, because application lifecycle management relies heavily on solutions. There are two types of solutions, unmanaged and managed. Unmanaged means that all the building blocks that are in this solution, tables, forms of the tables, Canvas apps, cloud flows, whatever, can be modified. A managed solution means that the modification of the building blocks is blocked or limited. So these are the main types. But if you create an environment, you will see that there are some solutions already there. And I call them the default solutions. And there is the default solution, literally called default solution. This solution is always there. You cannot delete it. And what it does is basically the container of all the components that are in that environment. And I said exist in an environment. It's not entirely true, because we still have some components that are outside of solutions. They don't show up yet in the default environment. But I thought let's keep it a little bit simple. The default solution contains everything. And then you have the Common Data Service default solution. This is the container for all customizations that are done in an environment, and I would say all customizations that are not added to your own custom solution, they're automatically added to this solution. I don't know if you guys ever do that, but if you, for example, in the Maker portal go to, let's just go there. If you go here and you go to tables, there is actually a new table option at the top, and I would say do not use it. But when you create a new table, this way your table is actually added to this Common Data Service default solution. I also will talk on Dataverse for Teams next time, and that's where we come back to this Common Data Service default solution again. And then there are some other solutions. Those are basically feature solutions that are that contain parts of the Power Platform, some functionality. And if you make use of Dynamics 365 and you install one of the like Dynamics 365 for Sales that also come with these kinds of solutions, they're automatically installed, owned by Microsoft. They're managed. You can see that because there is this lock icon. And some of the solutions are installed when you use a feature. So what you see here is like the bare minimum. When you create a so-called vanilla Dataverse environment, meaning you don't install any of the Dynamics 365 applications, you don't make it ready for that install, these are the solutions that are in there. When you, for example, create a flow that uses approvals, a couple of additional solutions will be installed automatically containing the feature for approvals. And when you add a portal to your environment, that's where a whole bunch of solutions is installed. There are some AI Builder solutions, and they're all automatically installed whenever you use a certain feature. So solution components, there are legions and legions of them. There is, I just created a screenshot of the default solution of a empty environment, and you see there are already 5,500 components in there. It's from tables to, there's even one app that's an administrative app that you can use for your environment. There are email templates, there's an environment variable and whatnot. So you can a solution can contain a whole host of different components. But since this is a more like maker, citizen, developer focused session, I thought your solutions probably will not have 5,500 components, and I would not advise you to create a solution that contains that much. But your solution will probably have tables, maybe choices, maybe a model-driven app with dashboard, some cloud flows, security roles to organize the permissions for your tables, maybe connection references if you're using cloud flows, and some environment variables. So the solution allows you to package it all together, everything that belongs together. But one thing that's a kind of an important topic when you start creating your solution, and you create your solution generally before you start developing your application, and that's the solution publisher. It basically describes who owns the solution, who owns the application that is inside of that solution. It also determines the prefix that's used in the schema name of the components that you create in the solution. So let's have a look. I have my my solution here, and the display name is solution. And I have my Unicorns Rock publisher. And I created this publisher myself, and I said, for this publisher, I want UCR as the prefix. And after that, I started to create a couple of tables. And what you see is that the name, which is the schema name, has this prefix at the front. It's only when you do it this way, first create your solution, make sure your publisher is set up right. After that, add stuff to the solution by creating it inside of the solution. Will your resources get this prefix? And why this prefix is important is because it gives you some information on who was this publisher, where does it come from, where does it belong to. So there are, and that's if you would have like the example that I showed you before, creating tables from the table section, that would have the prefix new. So, and new it doesn't say anything. So now with UCR, I at least know, that was Unicorns Rocks. That's Unicorns. That's Rebekka. That's probably one of her solutions. This obviously is not a publisher that I will use at a customer or at our own company, but I do like to do stuff with unicorns when I try stuff out myself. Solutions can be added in layers to environments. So there is the system solutions, that's at the bottom, and these solutions together, they stacked on top of each other determine what a user sees or what a user experiences when interacting with one of the resources in the environment. So the system solutions are always on the bottom. Everything you build or add is built on top of that. And then in this case, there are two managed solutions. So that means someone created a solution, then exported as managed, and then imported it into another environment. They're on top of each other, solution 1, solution 2, and then someone did some changes in this environment that caused this active customizations layer or unmanaged layer. And in the end, together, they make what the user sees or experiences. So let's have one example. So there's the accounts table. The accounts table is always available. It's in one of the system solutions. There's a property with a max length of 100. Then I install my solution, and my solution has updated this property to max length of 150. At that point in time, when a user would do something with the field that has this property, the user would be able to type a text of 150 without any problem. Then there's another solution by my colleague added on top of that, and that sets the property to 200. Now the user can actually type a lot. And then someone says, no, I don't want to, I update it in this environment and make sure that it's just 100 and nothing more. And this is the one that wins. So what the user then experiences is that the field that this max length is connected to, it can only be typed up to 100 characters and nothing more. So I need to get rid of this unmanaged layer before the user is able to type in 200 again. And this is kind of an introduction to solution dependency. So you have these stacks of solutions on top of each other, but they can have the same components because the components can be part of multiple solutions. And that causes a dependency between the two solutions. So I have my solution one again, and I created a custom table in when I created this solution and imported it to another environment. And then my colleague created another solution on top of that with an additional custom column. Not the whole table, just this one column on top of my custom table. That means that these two solutions now belong together. I cannot install solution 2 in any environment without having solution 1 be there. I cannot remove solution 1 from an environment without first removing solution 2. You can also have dependencies between components. And as a result, so that's like a kind of a relationship between them. Like, for example, a table field is added to a view or a model-driven app form. This is also a dependency. You cannot delete the field as long as this is in a view or it's added to a form. So a couple of effects, they're mainly related to what can I install or remove or update as long as this dependency exists. And this is something to take into consideration when designing your solutions, because you try to have the least amount of dependencies, but you also don't want your solutions to become too big. So it's a good way of trying to determine, are there any can I cut my application in bite-sized chunks that don't have maybe with the base dependency that has like the base functionality, and then add other solutions on top of that only have a dependency on the base dependency, the base solution, sorry. I just wanted to give you one warning whenever you're working with solution. Sometimes this is like you do it once and then never again. When you're working with solutions and you think you're in your development environment and you have this one column and you think, oh, and this column you actually use it for a while now, but then it appears you need to change the data type. Like I have a whole number, but now it needs to be a decimal or a floating or something else. Please never recreate the column with the same schema name, because when you delete your column from your development environment and then add a new column with the same schema name, you will always have issues when you try to transport it to another environment, because it will check on the schema name and then it sees, hey, there's a conflict. The data type does not connect. So when you create, either remove your column, deploy your solution to all the other environments, and then re-add it, or recreate a Dataverse column with a slightly different schema name to prevent this conflict happening. So I already talked a little bit about ALM, but now let's have a little bit of a deeper look into it. Let's look on time. I'm 10 to 8. Okay, so I have another 10 minutes. Hopefully I'll make it. So ALM basics. I won't dive too deep into it. As I mentioned, there will be another session in a couple of weeks that will do a deeper dive specifically on automated ALM. But ALM basically means application lifecycle management, and it's about transporting your solutions from one environment to another. And I think the bare minimum is having a development environment and a production environment. I prefer to have at least one environment in between where you test the stuff. You could have an acceptance environment. You could have like manual test and automated test separated. So there's a little bit of different. You can differentiate between how much stages you want. But the concept is you don't do the testing and development, and you don't develop in the environment where people are actually using your application. That's kind of what you want to start with. One of the things then to consider is what to use when. And there has been a lot of debate, and still people are disagreeing on this case. And I'm from the follow the best practice set by Microsoft. That means that you only use unmanaged solutions in your development environment. In all the other environments, your solution will be managed. And this is where the dependency struggle comes from, because dependency actually only applies to having managed solutions. Because when you import an unmanaged solution into an environment, it looks like all your resources are inside of this container and owned by this container, this solution. But actually, when you delete the solution from the environment, all the stuff that is inside of the solution is left behind. Only when you make use of managed solutions are you able to do a rollback, to remove a piece of software completely from a certain environment. So then doing this, moving it from one environment to the other, there are actually two ways of doing it: manually and automated. So with manual, you literally go to the portal, export and import your solutions manually from make.powerapps.com from one environment to another. And there are actually a lot of projects where this is totally fine to do it that way. It's just that you have to be sure that you do it the same way every time. If your solution is bigger, if there are more people working on it, if you have lots more changes, if your application has a larger impact within your organization, it might be a good idea to look at an automated way of deploying, using, for instance, CI/CD pipelines. And that basically allows you to configure, set up this deployment process from one environment to another, and then run it every time you want to do a new deployment at the press of a button. So manual deployment is happening from make.powerapps.com. You select your solution, click on export, then make sure you have published all your changes. Maybe you want to check for issues, running the solution checker. And then when you click on next, you have the option to select if you want to export it as managed or unmanaged, and set a version number. So the version number will always be automatically updated to the minor version +1. I always advise people to export them both ways, managed and both as managed and unmanaged. And I tend to keep the same version number for these two types, and store them somewhere in something you consider as a source control. That could be a repository in Azure DevOps or on GitHub. Could also be a SharePoint folder. This is the zip, so there is the version control, and the versioning is less visible than with automated deployment, but it's still something that you can rely on for if you ever want to go back to a change that happened at some time. If you have to do this a lot, it's very hard to get this tracked. So that's where, if you have to do this a lot, automatic deployment really makes sense. So when you import a solution, there are a couple of options as well. And by default, these are the settings that are used. In this case, there is actually an import of an already existing solution. When you import a solution that's not there, this bottom section will not be there. But when you import an existing solution, your version number needs to be, and your version number is higher than the version that's currently installed, you will get these options. And they're a little bit different than we used to have in the old imports in the old admin center. The override customizations is no longer there. You have update, stage for update, or upgrade. And by default, it's set to upgrade. And what upgrade does, it actually checks what are the differences between your current version and the new version. It will delete everything that's no longer inside of your solution and then merge, upgrade the current version to the new version. Stage for upgrade means you still have the two versions in your environment, and you need to trigger this last step to upgrade to the newest version manually. Update will replace the existing one by the new one, but what is left behind is stuff that is no longer in the new version. So I would advise everybody to use upgrade every time, unless you have a very good reason to do it otherwise. Automate your deployments can actually be done with two platforms: GitHub with Power Platform GitHub Actions, or Azure DevOps with the Power Platform build tools. So what it would allows you to do is using YAML or using the actions and the tasks to set the steps that you want to do. And actually, the steps that you're doing if you do a manual deployment are very similar to the tasks that you have available. As you can see here, I have a Power Platform checker. That is one of the checks that I can do when I do a manual import. I can do a backup of the environment before I do my solution import. I have the event to do a solution upgrade, extract solution, import solution, so I can automate the whole process. Because I knew I would not be able to dive deep in it, I thought, let's at least give you some of the get started with automatic deployment options. So there is a lab both for Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions lab to set this up for the Power Platform. A couple of things to consider. So what type of deployment do you want to do? What do you want? What environments do you want to make? When do you want to do the deployments, and how often? So I already mentioned what is your source control that you're going to use. So it's a good thing to think of that before you start your project. But also things like versioning conventions and publisher conventions. When do you want a new version to happen? So I have to say at my company we have a very basic or simple versioning convention. It's basically the version starts with the date, and then there's a number added to that, and that's the number of times you did the deployment on a specific day. For the publisher, I usually look at. I work for bigger companies, and then sometimes we have like global solutions that are created. Then I use the company name, and sometimes the solution is owned or meant for only a certain unit or part of the organization. In that case, I name the solution to that unit because it's owned by that unit. Sometimes I also just refer to the type of solution I'm creating. If it's a bigger solution with multiple bigger application stacked of multiple solutions. So this is something that's not. There's no one way to do this, but it's a good way to think of it how you want to do it. So we're on time. So if you I don't have a lot in the final part. If you're can you let me know if you're okay with continuing with the final part?
I am Rebekka. I think folks would be too. And if they have to leave, we'll connect next week. But I'm okay.
Okay. So the series starter kit, because that's one other way of it's basically another way of maintaining the whole platform or parts of the platform. So what is it? The series starter kit is a collection of components that are actually created with the Power Platform. They're designed to help you get started with developing a strategy within your organization for the adoption and support of the Power Platform. The series stands for Center of Excellence, and the Center of Excellence drives innovation in an organization. So the series starter kit is to help such a kind of organizational team that is built around of the Power Platform. And there is a lot in the kit. It's a set of solutions, and so if you want to have a good example on how to compartmentalize bigger solutions that are built up, then this is actually quite a nice example. There's a base solution, the core components, and what is in there is actually applications and automation, cloud flows in this case, that help you discover everything that is happening in your tenant around the Power Platform. There are a couple of dedicated applications that make managing the platform easier. For example, the DLP editor. DLP is the data loss prevention policies that will restrict what people can do with connectors. And there are what the CUI kit does is that they have an additional interface on some pieces of the platform where to make it a little bit easier than out of the box allows you to do. Then there's a solution with governance components. And this is actually a bunch of predefined processes for governing the whole platform. And a lot of them are around compliancy, like compliancy requests for apps, flows, bots, and custom connectors, basically sending makers of certain apps that reach a certain number of users or use a certain connector to provide a business justification for that application to be there. And then the third solution is nurture components. So what's in there is really to make a thriving internal community. And one example in there is there's an automated letter with product updates that you can send out to all makers, but there are also tools that help you organize internal app in a days, for example. And then there's a bunch of standalone add-ons. Theming components, and that's mainly around Canvas app theming. So making themed Canvas apps easier for your makers. And the second one is actually tying back to my previous subject, application lifecycle management components. There are two options. There is an ALM accelerator built on GitHub and an ALM accelerator on Azure DevOps. And if you want to start with automation, this is actually a very good way of if you haven't not anything set up. This is actually a step-by-step way of setting up application lifecycle management with a simplified user interface on top of both GitHub and Azure DevOps to do the deployment from solutions through pipelines in a very effective way. Another solution, and these are the standalone solutions, so you could actually also use them without using any of the other tools. And the innovation backlog is actually is essentially an application that allows people to come up with ideas for applications that could be useful to the organization, and they have to fill in a bunch of data to determine how valuable their idea is, what will be the value to calculate the value for the organization, so you can determine what is the highest priority, what is the best solution to start working on. There is continuous development on this kit, so every month there's a new version, and they open sourced it a couple of last year, like a couple of months back. It's available from GitHub, and actually people can actually contribute there as well and ask questions. One of the main things in the kit, and this is a model-driven app, the App and View app, that would allow you to actually navigate through all the apps and flows and environments that are in your tenant. They are collecting using cloud flows. So the cloud flows need to be run with an account that has all the permissions, but access to this app can actually be a normal user with the applied roles assigned. And then you would be able to have a team doing governance work without the Power Platform, without the need of being, for example, Power Platform admin. There is a lot of other stuff in there, and they keep on adding to it. So I add the link to this as well. The setup is it can take a bit of time to set it up, but it's they really documented quite well in all the steps how you what is the easiest way to set up all the components, when to use what, and etc. And they're very helpful to help you if you run into any issues. So that's the main thing that I wanted to share on the COE Starter Kit. And that is the end of my session. So the question is, are there any questions?
I have one comment. I didn't want to interrupt you when you were talking about AG groups and integration with Dataverse, for that matter. And what it is, I want to let folks know that the particular integration is really powerful, from Azure AD over to Dataverse Teams, for that matter, in a sense that, when people are terminated, if you set up your AG groups to also handle license assignments, then automatically you would be reclaiming those licenses. So just to give you one particular example that we saw in real life here, we had this big customer who acquired a lot of licenses for their employees, cheap licenses per se, more of the per app license, or cheaper, I should say, not cheap, cheaper. And these guys, it was a major task for IT to go through all of the inactive users and reclaim those licenses. At times you may have, depending on the size of the business, you may have 100 people consuming those 100 licenses, and what is it now, $10, $20, I don't know. So it's a chunk of money for licenses that are not being used that could be reassigned to other folks. So when you use Azure AD groups in conjunction with Dataverse Teams, you can do the license assignment to the group. So if an individual becomes part of a group, they get the license by default, if licenses are available, of course, within the tenant. And then if they are terminated or they decide to move on with their life to another company, then that license is available to whomever joins the group next, right? So it's an automated process. An automated process. Sorry about that. All right, that's all I got. I don't see any questions on the chat. Folks who are here on the group, if you want to pose questions, you can. I would say if you are a maker, uh, I would go through the video once again, especially in regards to solutions, because I think that is one big area that I think makers can profit from.
Yeah, I also have like this my final slide. I'll share the share the slide deck. Share this share the slide deck. I put in a bunch of links to especially also around solutions and see where you started getting ALM and security. So because there is a lot of documentation on it. And there was a lot to cover today. So if you have never worked with it before, some stuff might not make sense. So that's I thought let's put this in here to at least give you something to have a look at.
All right, that is beautiful. I love it. I'm gonna go through the session again today. I have a big meeting tomorrow on COE, so I'm going to enjoy my time revising this. Folks, Rebekka, Aalbers, thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't catch whether or not you shared your contact information. I'll put here in the chat window shortly
I
here.
think it's
So
in my introduction slide. I don't know, but add it. I don't have access to the chat, by the way, so I'm not sure if anybody else, if other people have access. But
Me too.
I'll fix that. But anybody who wants to raise their hand and pose a question, go for it. Any questions?
Hey, Victor, it's Norman.
Go ahead.
Not a question, but I did want to say thank you for the content today. It's very timely. I'm working my way through DevOps for Power Platform, and it's not easy. So I appreciate the content that you're bringing forward. So thank you both. I appreciate it.
it was nice because I actually had a like kind of sort of an intake this morning with a customer that I need to do some consultancy on, that were trying to set up pipelines, and then he said, yeah, if my development environment and production environment and acceptance environment here, and I was looking, oh, you have like a development solution, an acceptance solution, and a production solution in one environment. Yeah, that's not going to work. So it's really understanding the concepts that are in the platform before you dive into Azure DevOps is kind of important, because otherwise you get these kind of things. So I was already saying, so I know where to start. So let's plan a meeting for next week. Yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
and
yeah.
probably you have to get back. I don't know who's doing the session on ALM later on, but there is going to be one that I know that.
Yeah, it is pretty important. We did a survey on LinkedIn, I think 2-3 months ago, on what folks think would be the next skill makers and citizen developers should learn, and I think developers too. And a lot of people said, just basic ALM within Dataverse, because I think that's one pain point for, especially to tech leads, the team leads for that matter. They have to go back and then redo stuff, and if they have to recreate fields, it's pretty much doing the work all over again, right? So understanding these concepts, in my opinion, is key, and apparently it's key for a bunch of other people too in on LinkedIn. So yeah, no, this is good. All right. Well, Rebekka, thanks again for your time.
You're welcome.
We'll connect again
For
next
sure.
week. And again, folks, if you have questions, concerns, comments, something that you'd like to see, something that you tested yourself, and you want to maybe show like as a pre class next week, let me know. We can make it happen. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, bye.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
Take care,
Bye, guys.
everybody.
See you. Bye.
Bye.